President Trump will meet with the president of China this week, Xi Jinping. You know, there's harsh criticism of China, from trade policies to a military buildup. That has been a cornerstone of the president's campaign and now his presidency. The Chinese leader is set to visit Mr. Trump's Florida estate at Mar-a-Lago for 2 days of talks. The high-level sit-down comes as the tensions between the U.S. and North Korea has been growing. It's a situation the president would like China's help in diffusing. Ambassador John Bolton is here, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, chairman of the Gatestone Institute in New York, and a Fox News contributor. You know, Ambassador, Kim Jong-un, his nuclear program, the continued ballistic missile testing, do you think the president can really actually persuade his Chinese counterpart to finally rein in the dictator?
No, because I don't think China really appreciates how concerned we are at the moment about North Korea's developing capabilities finally to get one of their nuclear devices onto a missile that can hit a target in the continental United States. Our military authorities, our intelligence officials looking at this think this is very, very imminent, perhaps as early as next year. And I think what China really needs to hear is that they need to apply their unique capability to pressure North Korea to make that happen. This is not something to be negotiated between the United States and North Korea. This is something that China needs to be responsible for, and we need to think what the end state is once that pressure is applied. Well,
the diplomacy so far in the past 20 years is boomeranged. I mean, President Clinton, 1994, had the exchange for oil and food, and North Korea promised not to develop nuclear weapons. That was a lie. And then President George W. Bush took North Korea off the state sponsors of terrorism list. I mean, giving them an olive branch. And instead, what do? They give us a slap in the face.
Right. Well, we've had 25 years on and off of diplomatic efforts with North Korea. I wouldn't trust that regime as far as I can throw it. They'll agree to almost anything if it produces tangible benefits for them. And they've pledged on multiple occasions to give up their nuclear weapons program. They've never been serious about it, and they've never done it. That's why I think we've wasted so much time. It's absolutely foolish to think that another year, a 26th year of negotiation, will change anything. And it's also why we're facing some very difficult choices with respect to possible use of military force to keep the United States safe. I think the only real acceptable outcome here is the end of North Korea itself, the reuniting of the Korean Peninsula. I think it would be useful if President Trump began to raise that issue with President Xi Jinping. They're obviously not going to settle it this week. But if China wants, as it says, it wants North Korea without nuclear weapons, it needs to step up to the plate, which it has not done these past 25 years.
Well, what type of pressure can he put on the Chinese president? I sat down with someone who is one of your successors, Nikki Haley, the current U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and she told me that China should impose sanctions on Pyongyang. Here is what she said.
China is the only one that can move North Korea. They can put enough pressure on North Korea to get them to step back. Now it's time for them to prove it.
Do you think Beijing will?
I think they have to. And I think that the United States needs to put enough pressure on them that this is a threat to the world now.
We've heard about China and coal and some incremental type of stopping some of the trade, but they clearly haven't done enough.
Well, look, it's actually what goes in the other direction. China supplies over 90% of North Korea's oil needs and a substantial amount of food and other humanitarian assistance, mostly to keep the North Korean population in North Korea. I think China's well aware it has all the leverage it needs over North Korea. What it's afraid of, and rightly so, is when it exercises that leverage, the regime itself is so fragile that the whole thing could collapse. And China fears the consequences of that. I think there's a deal here between China and the United States where they can accept, in effect, the merging of North Korea into South Korea and eliminating this nuclear weapons threat. But it's a complicated issue. Frankly, we should have started talking to China about it decades ago, but better late than never, because as North Korea continues its ballistic missile program, it continues its nuclear testing, the day when they will be able to deliver a nuclear warhead anywhere in the world is fast approaching. And it's not just North Korea. Anything they have, the next day Iran can have if the price is right.
That is a chilling scenario, and as you say, those missiles are not aimed at Beijing, but aimed instead at us. Ambassador John Bolton, always good to see you. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course.
Breaking right now, an explosion rocking a subway in St. Petersburg, Russia, specifically. Pictures are just coming in showing metal doors completely blown off the cars, debris scattered inside. Right now, reports of several being injured. There's also reports of a second explosion at another subway station. Still no word on whether or not this is terror-related, and we will continue to follow that for you.
I want to get back to the story now from overseas. Significant story that 10 are dead, at least 50 injured. An explosion rocking a subway train in the Russian city of St. Petersburg. The Kremlin now saying investigators are looking at this as possible terror. Amy Kellogg watching that story from Europe with the latest. Amy, what do you have now?
Hi, Bill. Well, the original reports were that there were 2 blasts between 2 separate subway stations in St. Petersburg, and now it sounds like maybe there was 1 blast between the 2 subway stations instead of 1 at each station. Again, President Putin saying that they're looking into all causes, including terrorism. But, Bill, when you look at the pictures from the aftermath of this explosion, it looks like there must have been a bomb inside of that train. 10 people killed, 50 injured, according to reports, and many of them may be children. St. Petersburg is Russia's second city. It is President Putin's hometown. He happens to be there today, Bill, meeting with the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. And so he's been informed of all of this, of course. He has said they're looking into causes, but a massive evacuation has just completed itself in St. Petersburg. Helicopters were brought to the scene to evacuate some of the dead and the injured. It was a quite shocking bit of news that happened this afternoon. It wasn't at rush hour. It was in the middle of the afternoon. These subways are very widely used in Russia. They're extremely deep because they were used as bomb shelters during World War II. There have been, over the years, numerous terrorist attacks in Russia. There's a militant movement in Chechnya and Dagestan, but there hasn't been an explosion or a terrorist attack in Russia since 2011. So again, no one is calling it that yet, but a lot of reports are suggesting that there was shrapnel used in at least one of the things that exploded on that wagon. Again, it's possible that casualty numbers will increase over time. Some of the images that have not been shown that are circulating, Bill, on social media are very disturbing and graphic, and it really just does portray a scene of complete fear and chaos and bloodshed. So we will be watching to see how this story develops over the day. But again, at least 1 explosion in the subway in Russia's second city, St. Petersburg, just a short while ago.
Interesting that Putin was in that town at the same time. Thank you, Amy. Watch it for us, okay? There will be developments throughout the morning. We'll bring them to you. In Milan, Italy, Amy Kellogg with the latest there.
Well, U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley blaming Russia for not doing enough to stop the war in Syria. Her comments came in an interview with me, where she says the Trump administration will focus on trying to reform the United Nations, its budget, and its priorities to better address the threats we now face. You know, the Trump administration has also proposed taking a big chunk out of the contribution by U.S. taxpayers to the multi-billion-dollar UN budget. But Ambassador Haley insists any reductions will not end up harming the UN's humanitarian and peacekeeping missions. The new United States ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, was an accountant before she entered politics. Now, she is again relying on that business experience as the Trump administration seeks to cut the U.S. contribution to the UN budget. Where do you feel the United Nations has gone wrong?
Well, I think the United Nations got stale. I think that what happened was they got into the motions. It's what happens in most clubs. It went through the motions, and all of a sudden it got stale, and then the action went down, the costs went up, less things were happening.
The UN's regular and peacekeeping budget amount to more than $10 billion a year. Of that, U.S. taxpayers pay upwards of $2.8 billion. The president's budget proposal aims to slash $1 billion from that.
I think that we see that there absolutely can be efficiencies. So we're going to start cutting around the edges and see what we can get done. Where do you start to cut? The biggest amount of money that's spent in the budget is the peacekeeping missions.
And the U.S. pays a lot more for those 16 peacekeeping missions than anyone else, just over 28%, which the administration wants to reduce to 25%. Still, that amount would be more than double the next largest contributors, China and Japan, about 4 times more than Germany, France, and Great Britain, and 6 times more than Russia. On Friday, the Security Council unanimously agreed to reduce the number of peacekeeping troops deployed in the Democratic Republic of the Congo by 500 out of almost 17,000.
What I'm very proud of is in the first peacekeeping mission that we really took on, the entire Security Council came together and is saying, yes, we're going to reform. And we're going to keep doing this with every single mission. And that in itself is going to be massive cost savings.
What would you say to critics who would be concerned that this could cripple peacekeeping missions of the UN?
I would say that we want the same things. Basically what we want is for people to be safe. We want the aid to get in. We want to make sure we're lifting people up. Too much focus in peacekeeping missions has gone to the contributing countries. It's gone to the host government. It's gone to the management. No one's talking about the people on the ground. I think that the United States has always been the moral compass of the world. And I think we are generous by nature, and we want to see people safe. We don't want to see people starve. We don't want to see people mistreated by their governments. But you do have to say, what can we do? We can't be all things to everyone, but what we can do is work on keeping the peace.
What would you say to those who are concerned about humanitarian efforts? Will refugees starve? Will children not be inoculated if UNICEF is cut?
No, I think what we have to look at is everybody can cut. You know, in business we always said when you had down times, that was the best thing because it forced you to cut. It forced you to get smarter, but it forced you to be more effective.
Haley is also working to address what she sees as a long-standing tilt against Israel.
I think the biggest surprise has been truly the anti-Israel bias. To go in and think that every single month they have a briefing on the Middle East, but they're not talking about the issues we would care about. They're not talking about Syria. They're not talking about Iran. They're not talking about North Korea. What they are talking about is Israel. Every single month for 10 years, they've been Israel bashing. And that was something that I just couldn't believe they put the time and energy into doing that when we have so many threats around the world.
Haley's Israeli counterpart, UN Ambassador Danny Danon, told us he's already noticed a difference. What do you think of her?
I think she's great. You know, she comes with her values, with the truth, and that's what we need at the UN. We need to bring the UN back to its core values. The UN is a good institution, but it was kidnapped by evil forces. And I believe that with Ambassador Haley and my team, we can work together and maybe change the UN and bring it back to where it should be.
She says it's working.
So things are happening, and it's changing, and the tone is getting better. People suddenly realize we do have more important things to do. And not only that, I think they're tired of me yelling at them about Israel bashing.
Tired of yelling at the diplomats about Israel bashing. Well, Haley, you know, is the daughter of immigrants. She was born in South Carolina, and she rose in politics to be the governor of that state. And she is seen as a rising star in the Republican Party. You know, when President Trump announced her nomination, he said that she has the ability to bring people together. Well, now she faces that task in a sometimes hostile environment, where she has to deal with international diplomats from 192 other nations. But she says she does look forward to advancing American values at the UN.
You have heard the report that a higher-up in the Obama White House spied, ordered surveillance, that is to say, on President Trump and his team for political gain. But the mainstream media still has a different focus.
Can you say definitively that there was collusion? There were people affiliated with the Trump campaign who were working with Russians to time the release of damaging information about Hillary Clinton?
An escalating Russia crisis is threatening to undermine the president's ability to persuade even Republicans that he can bounce back.
Donald Trump desperately needed a rebound. But instead of bouncing back, Trump is still stuck in the Russian mud.
Still, aren't the possible White House leaks and surveillance of the team Trump a bigger story. Here to debate, the president of Americans United for Change, Brad Woodhouse, screen left, and his brother, executive director of the North Carolina Republican Party, Dallas Woodhouse, who is on screen right. Good morning to both of you guys.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, let's start. You know what, guys? Brothers, what I've noticed is it seems like, according to your political affiliation, that's the story you buy into. For instance, Brad, you think that this Russian collusion story is the biggest story in the world.
Well, I do think it's a big story. I mean, look, Steve, what we're talking about here is that Vladimir Putin and Russia and its intelligence services decided they wanted Donald Trump to be president,
right,
and they interfered in the election. And this, Steve, is not in dispute. I mean, this was a report that the intelligence agencies put out. This is what James Comey testified to.
Brad, we heard from the FBI director that they did not change a single vote.
What the FBI director? Well, first of all, Steve, this is the FBI. The FBI director said two things that were of note in that hearing. One, he said there was no evidence to support Donald Trump's tweets about wiretapping. Number one. Number two, he said there's a criminal investigation to determine if there was collusion between the Trump campaign
okay, Brad,
and the
I'm familiar
Russians.
with the Democrat talking points. We've heard them a million times.
That's not a Democrat talking point, Steve.
But
that's James Comey's testimony.
All right. Thank you very much. Now let's move to your brother. Dallas, there is zero evidence that the Russians did collude with Team Trump in getting him to be president of the United States. But the story that Trump referred to as the Trump surveillance scandal, where if it is true, the Adam Housley reportage that came out on Friday, a higher-up, a member of the Barack Obama White House, unmasked surveillance from the intelligence community for political purposes. If that is true, that is a gigantic story.
And also a criminal act. I mean, we actually know the only criminal act that we know has occurred was the unmasking of people regarding this affair. That's something the Democrats don't want to talk about. It's something we've got to get to the bottom of.
It's not true.
And you know, I would ask your readers or your viewers to take a look at Byron York's column this week that talks about how we have to focus on the substance of these investigations, that there are serious matters that have to be looked at. I think Adam's story is very concerning. Although I don't think it's a big surprise to a lot of people who support Donald Trump. They know something is fishy here. They know something smells. They'd like to get to the bottom of it, but I'm not sure they have a lot of confidence that we will. But it seems like that there was an effort to muddy the waters around the effort to beat Hillary Clinton by the Obama team, and that's just very concerning.
And, Brad, we heard that was going to be the Democratic playbook going forward after the election. Do whatever you guys can to make Donald Trump seem an illegitimate president.
Steve, it wasn't a Democrat testifying before the House Intelligence Committee. It was James Comey testifying, saying there's a criminal investigation into the possibility of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians
so far,
to
zero evidence
interfere with the election. Well, tell me this. If there's no evidence of any type of collusion, why is Mike Flynn asking for immunity? Donald Trump previously said, if you're asking for immunity, you must be guilty of something. Mike Flynn is asking for immunity for a reason. He said, his lawyer said, he has a story to tell. Let's hear the story before you.
I think that's probably just a good lawyer on his behalf trying to, keep him out of any sort of legal peril, given the fact that I think it was the president referred to it as a witch hunt regarding Mike Flynn last week. Dallas?
Steve, after all these months, they still cannot accept that Hillary Clinton was a bad candidate, and that's why she lost.
Well, look, there's a lot more to it than that. Donald Trump is president. No one is saying he's not that he's not president, Dallas.
Well, but you're trying to delegitimize him.
I'm not trying to. Day before, he suggested he didn't get the popular vote, so he wasn't president.
You know what? I don't run the FBI. The FBI, Dallas, is investigating Donald Trump's campaign for possibly colluding with the Russians to undermine the election. If you have a problem with that investigation, take it up with James Comey.
Okay, there you go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. The Woodhouse brothers, Dallas and Brad, reporting from all across the country. Thank you, guys. Have a good week.
Meanwhile, on a different note, a liberal mayor blasting the president for his threat to deny federal cash from cities protecting illegals.
Targeting sanctuary cities is a way for them to tell mayors and other folks, around the country, one, that they're sticking to what I think is a very unconstitutional and un-American policy, and trying to intimidate us into being what I've called fugitive slave catchers, to run around and do their bidding in our cities.
Really? Throwing out illegals? He'd equate that to that? He's the host of The Blaze, Lawrence Jones, and joins us right now. Lawrence, what's your take on his take?
Hey, Brian, I'm a little upset about this. Actually, I'm mad as hell. I don't understand how somebody can compare this to the Constitution and slaves when it took a constitutional amendment for black slaves to be free after coming here unwillingly. So how can they continue to make this comparison when these people can go home at any time, anytime?
Absolutely, on that level too. And the fact is, if that's his view, that illegals amongst us, if you report them or follow up, especially if they committed a crime, they're out. By following the law, they equate it to that. More pressure on law enforcement when African American leaders do things like this, correct?
Yes, and where's the Congressional Black Caucus? Listen, Brian, freedom is not free. Okay, people paid a price for black slaves to become American citizens. There was no free health care. There was no food stamps. There was no government assistance. You didn't get paid for your labor. These people get here, get a job. They get free health care. They get government assistance, in-state tuition, and all other things that other Americans get. I think it's unfair. I am shocked that a black man in the Congressional Black Caucus are silent on this. It is unacceptable.
So, Lawrence, look at this. It's very interesting. Even if you're in liberal cities, law enforcement can go along with the mayor only to a certain degree. For example, you don't get any more liberal than Mayor de Blasio when he goes to work. NYPD reportedly is just for ignoring him and alerting ICE officials when they arrest somebody or detain somebody that is here illegally. So there's a little problem. There's a pushback in Massachusetts, too.
It's obstruction, okay? We've seen this where judges were letting inmates out the back door of the judge's entrance when ICE agents were waiting outside. These people need to be held criminally responsible. The mayors shouldn't have funding from the federal government. These counties should be stripped of funding. These people are obstructing the law. They need to be held accountable. This is not the Underground Railroad, as many liberals are now calling this. This is pure obstruction. If you want to be a citizen in this great country, you need to go through the process. Freedom ain't free, brother.
Famously now, we point out Bill Clinton in the 90s making a speech saying we have to enforce our borders and get more border patrol. What happened to this? Why is this such a partisan issue in 2017 when we were all in agreement in the mid-90s?
Because they want the votes, okay? All right, they're trying to use this just like they used with black folks of the whole racism in the Republican Party. This is just another ploy to get votes, to pull at people's heartstrings while completely ignoring the black experience in America, what it took to be Americans. This is just another emotional play to get Latinos to consistently support them by even when the President Obama deported more people than any other president, nobody wants to talk about that. I think this is just another example of that.
All right, Lawrence Jones, thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
Brian, thanks, brother.
There are two new magazine covers out that kind of sum up the media mindset against President Trump. One is from The New Yorker, shows Donald Trump playing golf on the White House lawn and smashing a bunch of windows in the White House. The other one is The Economist, which shows, again, Trump the golfer trying to dig out of a very, very, very deep hole or sand trap, so deep you can barely even see the guy. And that about sums it up. The argument, the view in the mainstream media, which doesn't have any great, deep, abiding love for this president, is he's having a terrible time. His presidency is in crisis. He's drowning. He shows he can't do the job, all of that. Now, if you want to take a blunt look at the first couple of months, there have been some mistakes and missteps, of course. He's had the 2 executive orders on immigration, both of which have been blocked by courts, the second one at least for now. He had, of course, the big health care bill that failed to even come to a vote in the House because of the opposition of the Freedom Caucus, and now the president's involved in a spitting match, to use an old-fashioned term, cleaning it up just a little bit, with this conservative wing of the party over who's to blame. He's had some other stumbles on appointments and things like that, and no major legislative accomplishments yet. On the other hand, the economy is doing pretty well, and economic confidence seems to be up. Stock market has gone up about 10% since he was elected, so that's good. The Neil Gorsuch nomination, the Democrats are going to delay it, but eventually he'll be on the Supreme Court. He's taken action unilaterally on the Trans-Pacific, the Pacific Trade Partnership deal, and some other things. So here's my word of caution. It is very, very easy in our instant, soundbite, win the next news cycle culture to say, that's it, he's toast, what were we thinking, he's never going to be a good president. But every president goes through a learning curve. I mean, around this time in 1961, President Kennedy had the Bad Pigs fiasco, the ill-fated invasion of Cuba. Bill Clinton got off to a very rocky start. He never got his health care bill through, Hillary Care as it was called, and that took up a year and a half. So the question is, for a guy who's never been in politics, who is learning the levers of Washington, who was elected really running against both parties, the Republican establishment, which wanted anybody but Trump, and of course the Democrats, you know, there's plenty of time for him to turn this around. The question is, will Donald Trump learn from the experience of the last couple of months, and how will this look when he's been president for 6 months? How will it look when he's been president for a year? If he starts to put some successes on the board, if he gets a tax cut or a tax reform bill, if he gets some kind of infrastructure bill through, then we will look back and say, yeah, he had a first couple of rocky months, but now he's doing all right. The polls might come up. You know, we live and die by the polls inside the Beltway. If he's down around 35%, we say it's horrible. If he comes up to 50%, we say, wow, it's a great comeback story. So what I'm cautioning against here is the rush to judgment. The media do this all the time. You're either brilliant or you're awful and an idiot. And so the guy's been in office 2 months. And, you know, when you elect somebody who has never been a politician, that person brings great strengths in that he is not wedded to the Washington way of doing things, draining the swamp and all that. But you also, therefore, have somebody who doesn't know the nuances of dealing with Congress, of drafting executive orders so they can pass judicial muster, and all the things that even experienced politicians go through when suddenly they're president and every word is measured carefully. So I'll be reporting periodically on how I think he's doing and how the media are covering him. But bottom line here, it's still early, folks.
The Senate Majority and Minority Leader drew their battle lines this morning for what could be a historic week in American politics. The chance of stopping a Supreme Court nominee by partisan filibuster, or the Senate breaking with its time-honored tradition of a 60-vote threshold to break it. Let's bring in our political panel for a fair and balanced debate. Alex Khanna, Republican strategist, former communications director for Marco Rubio's 2016 presidential bid, and Dan Kananen, principal at the Smoot Twos Group and veteran of the Clinton and Obama campaigns. Gentlemen, great to see you.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Dan, give us the calculation for some Democrats, especially those who are in the 10 states that Trump won, that they're coming up in 2018 for re-election, and still they say, I'm going to be an obstructionist.
Well, I'm not sure they're saying that, Leland. I think they're thinking that, you know, we made a big case in 2016 that there'd be a big political price to pay if you didn't confirm Merrick Garland under even more, I think, from a Democratic point of view, absurd circumstances. And you can't make the case in retrospect that any Republicans really lost their seats because they didn't even have a hearing on Mr. Garland. So I think in this case, they're thinking that the base for the Democrats is activated in the same way the Republican base was activated in 2010. Anything that comes from this president, from Mr. Trump, given all the questions about Russia, all the questions about the agenda he wants to push, is going to come with a higher price. And I think that they understand that they need to be holding him accountable, and that they will be held accountable to their base on the left.
All right, so Alex, that's the Democrats' calculation. What is Mitch McConnell's calculation when it comes to breaking the filibuster rule, in common parlance, going nuclear?
Well, twofold. One is there's never been a 60-vote threshold for a Supreme Court nominee in the past. In fact, there are two members of the Supreme Court right now, Alito and Thomas, who were confirmed with less than 60 votes. They had both had more than 50, but less than 60 votes. So they're trying to set a new standard by saying that this nominee now needs to achieve 60 votes, and I think McConnell is calling them out on that. The second thing is that this will likely not be the last nominee, Supreme Court nominee, that Donald Trump gets to appoint. And the next one could very well change the balance of the court. So let's go ahead and pull the nuclear option now to get rid of the filibuster rule, so that for the next one, the political cost isn't as high and we can nominate whomever we want.
That can play both ways, of course, Dan, in the sense that that may work great for Republicans this time around. It may not work so great for Republicans if all of a sudden they're in the minority come 2018.
Well, that's the obvious point. I think it's totally true that Republicans aren't going to control the Senate for forever and may not have it in 2 years. But there's another more inside point, I think, and that's the fact that Mitch McConnell now can certainly talk tough and be in basic alignment with Paul Ryan and with Donald Trump on big issues. But Mitch McConnell doesn't want the Freedom Caucus telling his chamber, his body, what to do. And sometimes that 60-vote threshold can help a majority leader from stopping things before it gets to the chamber, or having a very rational excuse for not moving forward on something that is a requirement on the far right. All of a sudden, the Freedom Caucus is going to push Paul Ryan to get things through their House, which will get to the Senate. And if there isn't that 60-vote threshold on legislation, Mitch McConnell is going to have maybe a tough spot to hold that line in between Donald Trump and the House.
And that brings us to where we are right now. And by right now, I mean right now, as President Trump is out this Sunday at his golf course, about 30 miles from the White House, with none other than Rand Paul, sort of the most vocal member of the United States Senate that spoke out against the health care bill. And this goes now to Alex. You think about what's coming up here for this president. You've got big hearings on the wall and on immigration that is a signature part of his campaign. You've got a possible government shutdown coming on. You've got tax reform that he wants to push through. And still he says he's not giving up on health care. Is this reach out to, shall we say, a certain part, perhaps you could say fringe of the Republican Party, the right way to go about this? Or should he hook dogleg left and take up with the Democrats?
Well, it certainly doesn't hurt, but it's not going to. But simply going and playing a round of golf with Rand Paul is not going to make all of Donald Trump's political problems disappear overnight. We only have a 2-vote majority in the U.S. Senate. That is very narrow, especially when you're talking about doing big, complicated things like health care reform or overhauling the tax code. I think April will be a pivotal month for Donald Trump's presidency. Even though it's young, even though his presidency is still very young, March was a disaster. April, he can get some things done. He can get a Supreme Court nominee confirmed, as we just discussed, and he can fund the government at the end of the month. If he can do those two things, he'll have some momentum coming out of April. Yeah,
well, the political version of April showers bringing May flowers. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Always good to see you guys.
Thank you.
All right, have a great Sunday.
Thanks. Donald Trump, you don't stand for our values. That's what they said. Donald Trump, you didn't win this election when it came to health care. I don't care.
Well, forget about going high. The new DNC chair, Tom Perez, says Donald Trump didn't win the election, and Republicans don't care about people.
Oh, here to respond, RNC Chairwoman Ronna Romney McDaniel. Good to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
A lot of anger coming from Tom Perez. What's your reaction?
Well, I think it's deeply concerning to see the head of the Democrat Party continue to try and delegitimize this election. Not only President Trump, who did win this election by a lot, but also the voters. Voters like people from Michigan and my state who were so concerned about jobs and the economy. And Donald Trump came and presented a vision, and the Democrats are continuing to ignore what the voters said on November, that they feel like this country is going in the wrong direction. And the anger he just showed and delegitimizing their voices is very concerning.
Can I just underline the fact that he's cursing on one of his first public appearances? I didn't remember Terry McAuliffe, whether you agree with him or not, he was not handling it that way. Ed Gillespie and others who in this position should usually show a degree of class. Number two, this is the handpick of President Obama. That's the one they pushed forward. So he represents his school of thought, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think Democrats should be denouncing his behavior this weekend. To say that Republicans don't give a blank about people, that should not be rhetoric that the head of the Democrat Party should be using. And he keeps talking about resist and not working with the president. Are they going to resist better jobs? Are they going to resist a better economy? Are they going to resist better national security? President Trump continues to reach out to Democrats. He's saying, let's work together. We have to solve some big problems. And this is the leader of the Democrat Party basically saying, we're not going to work with you on anything.
Sure. And, you know, President Trump has gotten some good news when it comes to creating jobs and the economy. It feels like optimism hasn't been this high in quite a while. But you know how it works, Rana. That's all the Democrats have, is they're trying their best to delegitimize him. It's the same thing with the Russia thing. And so when you see Tom Perez out there, all he's trying to do is stir up his base, and it's effective.
It's the Democratic leadership doing this. Democrat voters, they voted for Donald Trump, a lot of them. They want to see problems solved in Washington. They want to change from the status quo. They want leaders in Washington tackling health care that is crumbling around them, premiums going up. They want a good Supreme Court justice nominated. They want to get rid of the nonsense.
But Rana, what you're losing are independents. It seems like his base is strong, but independence is shrinking because of perhaps the constant barrage of negativity. How do you deal with that?
Well, through action. And you've seen Donald Trump from day one get to work. He's already put jobs back in this country. In states like Michigan, with Ford putting $1.2 billion into plants and Carrier and other jobs around this country. You've already seen him fight for health care. You've seen him put forward a great Supreme Court justice nominee. His actions are fulfilling the promises he made on the campaign trail. And as independents and voters start to see that, they're going to rally around Donald Trump. They're already doing it.
Actions, ideas, that's what gets people to the polls, not a bunch of anger. We'll see how all this plays out. Ronna Romney McDaniel, good to have you here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Sean Spicer routinely mixes it up with White House correspondents, but one exchange with April Ryan of American Urban Radio Networks has sparked some pretty sharp criticism.
How does this administration try to revamp its image? 2.5 months in, you got the Shade story today. You got other things going on. You got Russia. You got wiretapping. You got
no. We don't have that. I know.
On Capitol Hill.
No. I get it, but you keep. I've said it from the day that I got here until whatever, that there is no connection. You've got Russia. If the president puts Russian salad dressing on his salad tonight, somehow that's a Russian connection. But every single person, no, that's, I appreciate your agenda here, but the reality is, no, hold on. No, at some point report the facts. The facts are that every single person who has been briefed on this subject has come away with the same conclusion. Republican, Democrat, so I'm sorry that disgusts you. You're shaking your head. I appreciate it. But
April Ryan talked about the heated back and forth on MSNBC.
I've been here for 20 years, since 1997, the second term of Bill Clinton. We've never seen anything like this before. And my question was simple. How do you change the perception problem, basically? Unfortunately, I was roadkill today.
Guy Benson's Sean Spicer took a lot of heat for supposedly being overly aggressive. Even Hillary Clinton defended April Ryan in a speech talking about women of color. What's your take?
Okay. Well, I don't put much credence in Hillary Clinton. I think she's sort of been an opportunist since she lost to Donald Trump, taking shots whenever she can. But I do think that maybe Spicer, look, he's got a tough job every single day, right? It's a big challenge every morning and afternoon. And so for him to come out, maybe he could have used a lighter touch. I hate second-guessing these guys too much, but probably a lighter touch was in order. But if you're a reporter, not a
commentator, and get to Sean Hannity later, but if you're a straight news reporter and you're sitting there shaking your head in disgust, I can see why Spicer might get his dander up over that a little bit and call her out. I don't think she was a victim here, and she was portrayed as a victim. She's a reporter doing her job. She can defend herself. She doesn't need Hillary Clinton or other people playing the race card.
Well, and let me play for you something that Spicer said on Hugh Hewitt's radio show on this very subject.
And April is a tough reporter that knows how to, throw it out and take it back. And so to somehow, I think it's frankly demeaning for some folks to say that she can't take it.
So basically he's saying, I give everybody a hard time in that briefing room.
Sure, and I think he does. He's in a difficult position, as we've said. Now, the key point here is I think lots of people perceived it as somehow treating her as a child in a childish manner, telling her to stop shaking her head. Now, to me, you know what? This is the back and forth. And April Ryan's quite capable, and as you saw during the course of that back and forth, she continued to talk to Sean Spicer.
Right, but when Shawn says, I know you have an agenda, that's a serious
That's
thing to say.
I'm glad you said that, Howard.
Yeah.
That's the real heart of it, and I think lots of people have gone away from that because they want to focus on the fact that she's a woman, she's black, or whatever. But the real issue here was Sean Spicer suggesting she had an agenda as what Guy described, a real reporter asking a question about a perception issue that I think is legitimate.
But not just her. They make this accusation against the media broadly, that the whole media has an agenda of which she's a part.
I understand completely. You're in that briefing room regularly, Erin. First of all, was there anything wrong with April Ryan's question? No.
Really, no.
And second of all, does this all help her? Not that she sought this, but in the sense that there's a New York Times profile of her saying, new renown for reporter after clashes at White House, and it brings her some attention.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of people in the front of the briefing room perform their questions, obviously, and some of the of us who sit in the back of the briefing room ask questions that get dismissed a lot. And look, Sean Spicer dresses down Jonathan Karl and Jim Acosta nearly every single day, and Glenn Thrush too sometimes. So it happens. This is not unique to April Ryan.
Well, I did like the Russian dressing line, and also we should point out that the very next day, Sean Spicer made a point of calling first on April Ryan. How are you doing today? So apparently no hard feelings for the moment. Juan Williams, Guy Benson, Aaron McPike, thanks for stopping by this Sunday.